to talk today about engaging students through the use of Plickers. And Plickers happen to be a type of classroom response system. And with any classroom response system, there are pros and cons to each. So when trying to decide which one to use, it's important to keep in mind that, some pros that really involve with all of Clicker response systems is that it allows you to see what your students are thinking, how much they might already know about a subject. You get real-time responses. You can even use them as quizzes and grades. And it can actually, studies have shown that it can get students to come to class because they feel like they're part of a learning community. Some cons that we see include that there's a learning curve for both the students and for the instructor on how to use them. They can cost money. They can tend to be exclusive, so students have to purchase them, or if you use particular systems that can use their already, bring your own device type situation, they have to have the right device. They can be used ineffectively. They're only as good as the questions that are asked through them, and they can involve a lot of time to set up questions as well as to use them in class. So I'm going to talk about one of these classroom response systems known as a Plicker. So you can see in this picture that all the students are holding up a little card. That is a Plicker, so it's a little QR code on top of just a white sheet of paper. Some pros and cons that we see with Plickers include that you still get to know what your students are thinking. You can test how much they already know, which is how I usually use them. I get real-time feedback. They can be used for quizzes and grades, and the best part about them is that they are free. So you can go to plickers.com, download these, print them off, and use them in your class with your own phone device. Some cons included in them is that there is a learning curve, so students have to learn not to cover the black portions of the cards. Learning curve for me to use my phone in order to collect the data. They do take up time in the class, and one of the cons that I found that tends to be a little bit inhibiting is that they only allow up to 40 students. So this is appropriate for smaller classes. Larger classes, you might want to look into a different classroom response system. So just to give you a closer look at what a Plicker is, if I zoom in on this Plicker, you'll notice that there are 4 letters on each side. All right, those correspond to the answers that the students want to give. And then I scan that with my phone, and it tells me how many responses that I have for each letter. I can then click to look at a different view. I can get a bar graph of that right on my phone. And if I choose to, I can actually show my students their responses. So on my computer, I get a live view that looks something like this. So this is an example of a question that I asked. And you'll notice that 83% of my students picked the correct answer in this instance. So I didn't have to go over that material as much. I just did a quick review and then moved on. And then what I did was that I actually staggered or tiered these questions. So that was a pretty easy question to begin with. Then I dug a little bit deeper to see if students understood the reasons behind the initial question, and I saw that 43% answered correctly. So this is what I spent the majority of my time discussing with my students, trying to get them to understand why particles move the way that they do during diffusion. I did a think, pair, share activity, so students saw that that somebody answered the question, and then I had them argue with each other on why they thought they were right or wrong. And so I polled them again, and we see that about 66% of students now had the correct answer. And so this happened without me going over anything. We got that 66% response. So then we addressed as a class why the other answers were incorrect and what made answer B the most correct in that situation. So again, this is a tool. It's only as effective as the instructor using it. And so what I want to really focus on is the questions that work behind these systems. There are many different ways that you can use these clicker questions, and I would say that a majority of, if not all, of subject matters already have pre-made questions available for you. You can modify some of those questions in order to save time but sort of make it more personal to your class. Or you can create effective questions on your own, and there's a lot of literature out there on how to do that. There are many different methods that you can use in initializing clicker questions. You can use tiered questions, so like I did, an easy question to begin with and then digging a little bit deeper. You can use what's called the step ladder method, where you would start off with fairly easy questions to begin with, and then include more critical thinking questions, maybe questions that don't necessarily have a right or wrong answer at the end. And then you can use them to address misconceptions, which again happens to be what I use in my classroom. Overall, we see with clickers is that what you really want to focus on is that, again, every clicker response system is going to have its pros and cons. You should do some research on the ones that you want to implement in your classroom. It's the questions that make the tool effective, not necessarily the device, although that does need to be taken into consideration. And if you use them regularly, they can really enhance the learning experience in your classroom, and I highly recommend that you use resources that are already available to you to save time in implementing them.